Okay, so welcome if you're here visiting on YouTube. My name is Sid or Sydney. I'm the research and evaluations lead at Apathy is Boring. And today we're just going to put out a little bit of content on the channel to help you sort of unpack what's happened in the 2025 federal election, fill in knowledge gaps for folks, and yeah, just help you stay connected in the aftermath and look forward to next steps. So welcome to What Happens Now, helping you understand everything post 2025 federal election. Before we run into that, I just wanted to do a quick land acknowledgement here that Apathy is Boring is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place that has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations, including the Kanien'kehá:ka of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, the Abenaki, and the Anishinaabe. We recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which our head office is based and from which we are facilitating this call. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. So yeah, please just make sure that you're always aware of which land that you're on as well. Okay, so I already gave a brief introduction of who I am. So we just wanted to say for anyone who did participate in any of our activities in the federal election, thanks so much for coming out to street teams, table topics, any of that good stuff. And thanks to anyone who also voted. It's super important to vote in all levels of government elections. So thanks for just showing up to the polls. Tonight or today, wherever you're joining us from and whatever time you're watching this, we'll be exploring sort of the what happens next and how you can stay involved. So we'll talk through what a vote actually sets in motion at the federal level, how to engage with elected officials, and then also why local elections like municipal ones matter and what you can expect from this year moving forward on that front. All right. So, this happened basically, the federal election. We know that we elected a Liberal minority government in Canada, specifically Mark Carney's government. So, what actually happens after that takes place for anyone who was sort of streaming and watching everything that happened in real time on the 28th? So, what follows an election is on the next slide here. So basically, a new parliament will form, which is where MPs are sworn in from the ridings that they were elected into. Parliament will resume at some point, and there's also a speech from the throne that lays out the government's priorities. Your MP's particular roles get set. They're the one representing your riding, whether you voted for them or not. They're also your sort of point of local contact. There's cabinet formation, so that's where the new prime minister will pick ministers for all the key areas that the federal government is involved in, from health to environment to finance. And then there's the opposition's role, which is what holds the government sort of accountable, so to speak. So just to sort of walk through that in a little bit more detail so you get a sense of what happens at each of these points. So election night, obviously we see lots of coverage on that across major news institutions in Canada. So maybe you were tuning in. So we obviously see that the winning party is invited by the Governor General to form government. Everyone has their speeches, whether they're loss or win speeches. And what we know is that if no party has a majority, they may form a minority government or a coalition. Elected MPs receive official confirmation and then they prepare to be sworn in as members of parliament. And then the swearing in ceremonies follow. So MPs take an oath and they officially become representatives of their ridings. After that, we have sort of that prime minister and cabinet formation part. Where the prime minister selects cabinet ministers. So Mark Carney has been undergoing that process now. Each minister leads a department, either environment, justice, indigenous services, health, all those things I just touched on. And the cabinet is expected to sort of reflect regional and demographic diversity too. So that's one thing that prime minister has to be accountable for when selecting the cabinet. And ministers are sworn in, and the government then starts to sort of set out its agenda, what it intends to do. And then following that stuff, we have the speech from the throne, which is delivered by the Governor General at the opening of Parliament. It's written by the government, and it's sort of what Canadians can look to understand the priorities and legislative goals, and it sort of sets the tone for the next year or the term, so to speak. And then MPs actually vote in response to that. They perform a confidence vote. And if the government loses, an election could be triggered, and that can especially happen in minority situations. So all that to say, after those pieces are taken care of, On the next slide here, then Parliament basically just resumes. So your members of Parliament begin sitting in the House of Commons, where we often see that live streamed footage from the big room where everyone's sort of discussing things together and debating. So what they're actually doing in that room is introducing and debating bills, which are essentially proposed laws. They sit on standing committees that study topics in a more sort of in-depth way, like climate change, healthcare, finance and economy, all that stuff. And they also are responsible for bringing constituents' concerns, your concerns, so to speak, to the question period and to debates. So that's essentially what they're doing. So all of those pieces covered, it's important that we also understand the situation we're in now. So we've got a little arrow on the left-hand side of the screen here, which indicates that we have now formed a minority government in Canada. The Liberal Party got fewer than 173 seats. That's what is needed to form a majority government. They didn't meet that criteria. So we've got a minority government, which basically means that the Liberals will need support from other parties to pass bills and stay in power. And that can lead to a lot of more negotiative and collaborative styles in sort of how they're working together in the House, but also sometimes instability. For instance, it can result in snap elections if confidence is lost. And a good example of sort of these situations playing out would be the 2021 Liberal government that had the NDP's support. The flip side of that is what we can see, what we did see in 2015 when the Liberal government was elected under Trudeau, was that they had more than 173 seats or more seats out of 343 in the House of Commons. So they can pass laws more easily on that front without needing support from other parties. And again, that can usually result in more stable governance that can often last the full 4-year term. And this is something that particularly matters because when we think of the average person and the average voter, and especially young people and youth voices, when a minority government is formed, smaller parties have more influence, and there's a greater impact that public pressure can assert on the government during these terms. So if there are issues that you care about that you would like to raise your voice on, sometimes minority governments can be a strategic way to do that. So on that front, what happens if you're not happy with the outcome of the election? Well, thankfully, civic action doesn't just end at the ballot box, and there's actually a lot that you can do to stay connected and continue using your voice whenever the government's in power. Namely, you can reach out to your MP, so you can head over to their office, you can email, you can call them. We highly recommend and encourage that everyone knows where their MP's office is, whether they were the person that you voted for or not, and make sure that you're accessing the services that they provide, especially if there are concerns that you really want to bring up. You can organize or join a community group that aligns with your values. Knock on wood, apathy is boring. Participate in consultations, petitions, protests, all that good stuff. Use media, write op-eds, leverage social platforms, all that kind of thing is great and a good way to stay civically connected even past the vote. But a good question to ask on that front is how these things actually make a difference. What does democracy actually mean outside of voting? So what are we talking about here? Well, ASB thankfully has a framework for democracy that we've put together that sort of emphasizes the ways that we feel democracy can and should be enacted in Canada. And as you can see, it's a lot more than just voting. So again, in our sort of definition, democracy is a system of government in which power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or through freely elected representatives. And I'm just going to go through sort of this graphic from left to right. So under a sort of healthy democracy, we have 5 separate pillars that we feel like all work together in conversation to support a healthy democracy. One being that inclusive and equitable participation. So that definitely looks like voting, but it also looks like access to running in a campaign at either a local or provincial or federal level. Just making sure that the playing field is really equalized for everyone to have their voice recognized and have an opportunity to participate however they would like to, passively or actively. Beyond that, we also recognize accessible information and strong media institutions as a strong pillar of a healthy democracy. So making sure that our legacy media institutions are able to continue doing the great journalistic work that they do, and that they're supported and properly funded in Canada to continue providing unbiased and nonpartisan, sources of us to engage with media and make sure that we're getting accurate information. As we know, there has been some changes with the way that Meta has sort of influenced how we can sort of, yeah, relate to media in Canada and where we can get our news from. So yeah, it's more important now more than ever with the rise of mis and disinformation in our country and sort of at large that we are making sure accessible information and strong media institutions are supported and that we're engaging with them. That third pillar in the middle is the peaceful coexistence and right to protest, which is something that we're super proud of when it comes to young people. Young people are really active on the forefronts of organizing and contributing to protests and peaceful coexistence efforts. And that's something that we think should really continue and that people should use as a way of sort of mobilizing around an issue that they care about. We also have barrier-free access to human rights, which is just our acknowledgement that beyond sort of the foundational documents in Canada that we have, the Charter, the Constitution, all those good things, that barrier-free access to human rights is enshrined and enacted and built into policies, laws, and sort of community cultures at all levels of our country. So that you're feeling that when you're out and about in your small community, in your workplace, when you're visiting the doctor's office, when you're, going to get your driver's license, right up to anything that you would do at the federal level, like going to cast your vote. So yeah, that's sort of our understanding of another piece of democracy that's very important. And then the last one being a free and fair electoral process. So anyone who knows ASB's work knows that we are committed to sort of reviewing, criticizing, trying to improve our electoral process, making sure that the processes that we have set out in Canada around voting and how we elect our representatives is truly supporting Canadians through and through. There's definitely different schools of thought there about whether first past the post is the best system under that. I would encourage folks to look at sort of our Better Democracy roadmap, which I'll talk more about later if that's something you're interested in. But essentially, this piece of democracy really just emphasizes that the way in which we elect people to our government needs to be representative of the public's views and should also ensure that government is encouraged to work together, and not sort of promote division and polarization and all that stuff. All right. All that to say, beyond this, we also have the Youth-Led Democratic Innovation Framework. And this is a super cool sort of Venn diagram and really just one of the foundational sort of bedrock pieces of Apathy is Boring's culture that makes its way into all of our programming. So if you've done anything with us, you definitely have seen this before. And this is what we like to use to encourage youth to get out there on the front lines of whatever it is, whether it's voting, whether it's contributing to an issue that they care about, protesting, deciding that they want to run a campaign or run for office themselves or what have you. This is really what we see as the ways that youth can and should be encouraged to participate in all different forms of democracy. So, we have youth as movement leaders, which is sort of integrating public debate and dialogue about a social issue or sort of a decision-making process. So these folks might notice that something is going on around them that they don't love, and they basically say, I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to raise my voice about that, whatever that means. I'm going to start protesting. I'm, going to get out there doing an advocacy campaign. I'm going to start deep canvassing, all that stuff. Then we have youth as creative organizers, and those are folks they might be even looking towards movement leaders and saying, I get it, you're being loud about an issue that's going on. I'm going to use the skills, networks, and creativity that I have and that I've built in my personal and professional life towards developing community-based civic and political solutions and look at the issues that you're talking about. I'm going to do something with that. So yeah, they're the folks that can often take a lot of what's done and what's discussed at something like a protest and say, what do we need from here? Where do we go? What are the solutions that we develop and how do we put those into action? And then we have youth as decision makers, which I think youth today feel like they're not necessarily embodying as much as, which is fair, but we would love to see more youth at the forefront of being in decision-making roles. So really what that looks like is just being able to make meaningful and substantial decisions that affect yourselves as young people, your peers, and your communities. So good examples of this would be if you had the opportunity to sit on some part of a council in your local municipal government, if you have ever been involved in the Prime Minister's Youth Council, if any of those things are really decision-making opportunities, and they can be baked into any form of sort of government or organizational capacity at the local, right up to provincial and federal levels. And we would love to see more space made for youth in those areas, youth advocating for the need for their voices to be included there. And really, yeah, just sort of breaking that glass ceiling, so to speak. So hopefully you see yourself somewhere within this Venn diagram and also see sort of, yeah, encouragement on where you'd like to go if you haven't taken on a certain role. Okay, all that said, let's dive a bit deeper into ways that you can stay active and dialed in after the election. So there's obviously stuff like grassroots activism. So you can organize rallies, marches, strikes, and demonstrations to raise awareness about issues. Issues don't go away just because a new government has been elected. We know that very well. There's still a lot that's affecting our country internally and externally. And it's super important that we continue using our voice on things that are either here or have even emerged since the new government has been formed that we would like them to take a look at and make sure that they know that it's important to us as citizens. Then we have sort of the digital mobilization piece, which is doing the social media campaigning, online petitions, viral challenges, sort of just a different form of raising your voice around an issue that you care about. And then obviously there's formal lobbying and political engagement where you can actually be writing letters and making phone calls, scheduling meetings to express concerns and sharing your perspectives on things like climate action or affordability, any of the major crises that are affecting our country right now. And even participate in public consultations when they happen. Go to town halls, all that good stuff is definitely great ways to formally stay connected after voting. Another good one that we talk about is deep canvassing. And again, there is always continuous government activity and elections that go on. The federal is obviously the big one that we like to talk about and then everyone sort of gets in a tizzy about. But there will be municipal elections that'll be coming up after that and more provincial elections. And so it's important that we know that deep canvassing is something that we can sort of embed into any of those. And also something that you can do if you work for an organization that has a strong message. Really, it's just an approach that you use during conversations that you have with folks. Can be formal, can be informal, can be something that you do when you're tabling at an event with an organization, or just something that you do when you're in a social situation and it comes up. And it's basically just the way that you, in a non-judgmental form, invite people to open up about maybe even very conflicted feelings they have on an issue. You would share vulnerably about your own life and your own experiences as well. And then just ask curious questions to create this mutual understanding that's grounded in your lived experience. If affordability is really important to you, you can join an advocacy group or make your own advocacy campaign that focuses on what you think is affecting affordability today. And go out into your community and gather consensus from folks. What are their experiences with affordability as well? How are they struggling? How is that similar to you? How is that different from you? What are the ways in which both of you can agree would be good solutions that should be put into power? What could you bring to an MP? That sort of rounds out what you've heard from your community. What can you do personally? So that's really what deep canvassing can help really powerfully harness, and we encourage it. So, what does ASB offer someone like me who wants to stay civically connected? Great question here. A lot, as it turns out. For folks in the know, we are continuously doing programming all the time that we hope that people will get connected to, apply to. Vote is obviously what we were just doing for the past month and a half here, making it fun and easy for young people to navigate elections on all levels of government. Vote doesn't just go away when the federal election goes away. We continue to stay active on provincial elections and even local elections, providing resources and breaking down information to make it easier for young folks to get to the polls. And there's always ways for young folks to become involved with the vote campaign and sort of enact some of those principles in your community by just getting out to the streets and encouraging other young people to vote, make a pledge to vote. all that good stuff. So that stays continuous. We also have the RISE program, which runs twice a year, helps young people find ways to co-create community projects and contribute in strengthening our civic and democratic fabric. And they do this by engaging on topics that interest them. So they get micro grants that they are allowed to use to develop a strong community project that will affect folks that they've spoken to in their community in a powerful way. It's a great, great program. And then we have Build, which is focused a lot more on advocacy campaigning. It equips young people with advanced and actionable civic knowledge, skills, and networks to effectively advocate for change at the institutional level, far beyond the ballot box. Also runs twice a year. You'll get exceptional skills in campaigning, tactic building, how to run for office, all that kind of stuff. So also a great opportunity. We also now have something called the Better Democracy Roadmap. So if you would head over to our website, you would see what I've sort of just plugged in here. This is a sort of new initiative that Apathy is Boring is focusing on that gives you the opportunity to join a public interest campaign that's all about helping our democracy and our politics in Canada in general grow up, as so to speak. And what we really mean by that is that we're building power and calling on our leaders to make our democracy better so we can make better decisions about our future. So this initiative in particular will look at things that are issues directly tied to and associated with our democracy and what we feel are criticisms of our democracy and ways that it could be improved. So looking at things like the electoral process and first past the post, looking at things like political financing, all the things that sort of wrap into the formal process of democracy that we feel we need to advocate could be made better and could be made more equitable in Canada and support Canadians through and through. So feel free to interface with that as well and sign up to be a part of it on our website if that would interest you too. Very related. And the last thing that we'll touch on here is just that municipal elections are super weapons of healthy democracies, and unfortunately, they're often very overlooked, which we don't want to see continued. Municipal everything affects us so much more than we think it does, but they're not well attended. So it's a good thing to ask yourself if you've ever voted in a municipal election before. Particularly municipal elections across Quebec will be coming up in November of 2025. So it's a good thing to keep in mind that if you are from that region, it would be a good time to, again, raise your voice on issues that you care about. And I think that's really illustrated well by examining sort of who's doing what at each level of government in Canada. So I'll just dive into that really quickly, sort of before we wrap up here. Essentially, the federal government, so we just elected a Liberal minority government. What are they actually responsible for? Enacting and enforcing laws that relate to the country's national interests. So that's anything from defense, foreign policy, immigration, all that stuff. The big things, so to speak, they're really responsible for. They manage our national finances, including taxation and budget allocation for federal programs and services, the national deficit, obviously. And then they oversee sort of interprovincial and territorial and international relationships. So super important stuff that's going on in our world and in Canada right now, being trade agreements, treaties, all that stuff. Very much a part of our political sphere these days. So that's the federal government's bucket of responsibility. Then we trickle down to provincial. Very big role for them in administering and delivering sort of those key social services to their provinces or territories, including healthcare, education, any type of social services really falls under their jurisdiction. Regulating the industries and professions that are also within their regions, like transportation, natural resources, labor laws, all that stuff. So if your province or territory has sort of like a major economy, so to speak, whether that's hydro or oil or what have you, the provincial government is really responsible for regulating that. And then developing and implementing policies that are tailored to the specific needs of their province or territory. It is their job to be the expert on their region, on the border that sort of they fit into, and make sure that they're supporting the folks that live there through and through. And then we have the lovely little nugget of municipal responsibility. And they are the ones that provide the essential services that really affect us on a day-to-day basis. So the province obviously has a role in some of that with providing education and healthcare. But if we think about anything that involves local infrastructure, from waste management, maybe public transportation, all the stuff that really sort of, yeah, impacts us on a day-to-day basis. If we're frustrated when a bus is late, or if we can't get somewhere because there's construction or there's, buildings going up and we're concerned about anything to do with that, like urban planning and zoning regulations, if we feel like there should be more low-income housing that's made in our particular community. All that stuff sort of can fall under the municipal umbrella. So yeah, it's all the things that you can think about that really impact you. They provide funding for your local libraries. So if you're using any of those services, they're in charge of local parks. And so if you're really interested in having more outdoor space too, that's something that your municipality would handle. So they collaborate with the other higher levels of government on issues that affect municipalities, like housing and environmental protection. And they're a great resource, and they often really welcome hearing from their constituents and would love to see a higher turnout in their municipal elections. So yeah, we really encourage that folks actually maybe just go down and take a look at your municipality, go to your local city or town hall, see what's around there, meet folks, ask what's sort of on the docket and what are they discussing, what are they planning for, go to town hall meetings and, use your voice at that level is really, really a powerful, underutilized tool across Canada. So we encourage that for sure. And that's really because your vote has more power at the local level. And that's because of what I mentioned, that turnout tends to be really low in municipal elections, which means that if you do go and you do contribute and you figure out, who you'd like to elect and what you feel like could make a difference in your immediate community, your voice will actually be louder until people start contributing more at the local level. You have more impact, and what you feel and what you decide to vote will make more of a difference. So yeah, definitely great stuff all across the board. So these are just little points that if there's things that you wanted to sort of carry forward in conversation with friends or family or anyone around ASB, a couple sort of reflections to think about, feel free to sort of comment under our video too if this is something you'd like to do. But we'd love to know what surprised you about post-election processes. Maybe start thinking about if you've ever reached out to a politician before. What was that like if you have? If you haven't, why haven't you? And what's one issue that you feel like you would like to stay involved with after the federal election has unfolded? And then start thinking about, given everything we talked about today, how might you do that? So we're really hoping that, yeah, through putting all of this together today, that we've been able to encourage you to stay civically active and connected and dialed in your community and at large in Canada following sort of this big federal election that got dropped on us. Take a minute, sink in, figure out how you feel about it, how you feel about the outcome, and what issues are still important to you, and the ways that you would like to move forward with those, and make sure that it doesn't just end at the ballot box, so to speak. So thanks so much if you tuned in and watched this video. Again, we'd love to hear from you in the comments underneath, or feel free to just carry this forward in that deep canvassing way and start having those discussions in your community with friends and family and folks in the know. So wishing you all a great rest of your day from wherever you've tuned in. And yeah, please feel free to make use of any of our programs or services. We'd love to have you involved. Thanks so much.